to a new edition of the Indian Express Explained Live, our series of online explanatory conversations with domain experts and authorities on specific subjects. I am Monojit Majumdar, editor for explanatory journalism at the Indian Express. We are discussing Karnataka today, where the Congress this weekend won its biggest election victory anywhere in quite some time and the biggest victory in the state in a full 35 years. How did it all come about for the Congress? There was anti-incumbency, of course, with the BJP governments of the past 5 years failing to meet the people's expectations. There was also the clear and catchy messaging by the Congress and tangible, substantive welfare promises. The Congress organization on the ground came together, its choice of candidates worked, and Rahul Gandhi's yatra had an impact. So, what is the national message from this election? Is the victory in Karnataka replicable in other states where assembly elections are held later this year and in the Lok Sabha elections of next year? To answer some of these questions, we have with us here social historian and political commentator Dr. Prithvi Chandra Shobhi, associate professor at Kriya University and a scholar and a student of politics and society in Karnataka. Dr. Shobhi wrote a wonderfully incisive op-ed for the Indian Express a couple of days ago. Those of you who haven't read it, do check it out on our website, www.indianexpress.com. Prithvi, thank you for your time. We are very happy to have you. Speaking with Prithvi will be my colleague, opinions editor at the Indian Express, Vandita Mishra. Vandita, you are a bit of a social scientist yourself, and you have reported on politics and elections from states across India for many years now. Vandita was also in Karnataka to report on the campaign. You can read all of her wonderful reporting on our website. Today's explained event is brought to you by our partner, Plutus IAS. My thanks to our partner. And thank you all for joining and welcome once again. Vandita.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yeah.
So I said thank you, Monojit, and it's wonderful to have you with us, Professor Shobhi. So if I may start with Professor Shobhi, when I was traveling in Karnataka for this election, I noticed everywhere there is this popular dessert. There's a tall glass, and in that there are several ice cream flavors and dry fruits all mixed up. So it's called gadbad. So the gadbad is basically because I think it was discovered by accident by somebody who just randomly mixed all kinds of flavors and dry fruits together. But why I recall that now is that for most of this campaign, in the run-up to this election, most people thought that the Karnataka result would be a gadbad. The Karnataka result would be some kind of a thing that you have to finally then untangle in the post-election days. And that has not turned out to be the case. It is a decisive verdict in favor of the Congress. So my first question, Professor Shobhi, is, were you surprised at all by this verdict? If so, in what sense?
I was very surprised because I think we were expecting a much closer election, even though it was pretty clear that the momentum was with Congress for the last 6 to 8 months. Congress needed to actually run a flawless campaign, which in hindsight it did. But the extent of its victory and the way in which it has managed to cobble together a social coalition in 4 out of the 6 regions has come as a surprise. I think even in other regions, especially in Bangalore, it's done reasonably well. It's only in the coastal regions that which are a traditional stronghold of BJP. They haven't done well. Incidentally, Gadbad actually comes from Udupi, or the claim of having created Gadbad is from Udupi. It's often the credit is given to a restaurant called Diana, which still exists.
I didn't have the courage to try it because it was just a lot of ice cream and nuts in it. Have you tried it?
I have. And it's quite delicious. In my younger days, I should say.
It looks very delicious, though very simple.
But just go back to your question. I think the results of this election did not depend on on what Congress was doing. In my mind, I think there were two other important questions. The first and the most important question was whether BJP would be able to hang on to its Lok Sabha voter. Because Karnataka today, unlike, let's say, 20 years ago or even 15 years ago, a plurality of voters have become BJP voters. And that's, not disputed or cannot be disputed. And that became very clear in 2019 Lok Sabha elections when BJP got more than 51% of the votes. Traditionally in Lok Sabha elections has always supported a national party. In 1989, Congress used to win more than 80% of all the seats. And that would also translate to winning, let's say, about 75% of the assembly segments in every election. But in the last 25 years, BJP has taken over that role and has done spectacularly well, except for one election in 2009. So the culmination of all that was how well it did in 2019. And for the past 4 years, the question for BJP has been, how do we keep hold of this Lok Sabha voter and ensure that that voter votes for the assembly election candidate? So that was one question. The other question was the impending implosion of Janata Dal. I mean, this is something which has been expected, which has been on the anvil. When Janata Dal is going to implode and the various fragments of Janata Dal would end up in one of the two national parties. This is something which is being expected since 2006 when Kumaraswamy joined with BJP to form a coalition government. But the waiting goes on. But a month before the elections, when the family fight broke out within Janata Dal, when the two brothers, Revana and Kumaraswamy, were in this endless fight, the chances of that impacting the prospects of Janata Dal candidates seemed pretty certain, because the mood was turning away from, even among strong supporters of Janata Dal, there was always a little bit of hesitation about the way family was trying to dominate party affairs. But somehow they managed to come back and even though they did lose some support, somehow managed to hold on to their base and turn in a creditable performance.
So you don't see the result proving the implosion thesis, right?
It hasn't happened yet. But it's the disintegration is it is continuing, and in the next 5 years it should reach its logical conclusion. When it actually happens is another matter.
So in fact, I ask you because my own sense was, when I was traveling through the old Karnataka region, the old Mysore region, that that implosion, that point has not come yet, because most places, I heard even young people say that there is Kutumb Raj, there is family rule in the Janata Dal, but their candidates are more approachable, or that they are more pro-farmer or more pro-poor. So my sense also was that the Janata Dal is still holding its ground, but it hasn't done very well, though. I mean, it's come down a lot from its previous performance.
I am not sure whether I would use the same adjectives that your informants did about the Janata Dal candidates. There are some legislators who are outstanding. I mean, there are some really good legislators who know how to get government resources, bring them to their constituents, and who have been very receptive to the needs of their constituents, but in government offices and taking care of their other issues and so on. But most of the other candidates are credible for other reasons. They have some appeal to the voter, not because they're excellent candidates, either because they have family, political legacy, therefore some base in some constituency, or because they have the right caste capital. So they have managed to find credible candidates, and in some ways, it's an interesting story. The supporters, the core supporter group that Devagowda had in the last 30 years, and how every decade he has been losing, starting with Siddaramaiah and so on, and then every 5 years he has lost 5 core lieutenants that he has had, very strong supporters. But somehow he has managed to, replenish the stock. And one of the reasons why in the last 10 years, Devagowda has been publicly talking about relying more and more on family is because some of the core supporters that he has had have been leaving, right? And thereby generating fresh rounds of discussion, talk about how Janata Dal is disintegrating. But it hasn't happened yet. What happens? I mean, Devagowda himself was not in very good health just before the elections, and when the end approaches, what impact it might have, we don't know. But I mean, this is a question which we need to come back because in some ways, what Devagowda and Kumaraswamy have been able to do over the last 30 years is something other politicians, including all the BJP politicians, have not been able to do. And that explains the loyalty that they continue to hold.
And what is that?
So that is a very effective way in which they've been able to offer patronage to Vokkaligas and to others in southern Karnataka. Mm-hmm. So one of the very effective ways in which both Mr. Devagowda and Kumaraswamy have wielded power is by getting government institutions, colleges, polytechnics, postgraduate centers, universities, and then other kinds of institutions established in their districts, in their stronghold. They've gotten jobs to their community members, to their supporters. They've gotten them postings, transfers, and you have in the district of southern Karnataka literally tens of thousands of people who are beholden to them, who are in key positions of bureaucracy. So since the 70s, Devagowda has maintained very good relationship with bureaucrats who have been giving him files with tips, which has made him an extraordinarily effective opposition leader. Yeah. So that ability to use the levers of power is perhaps unparalleled. There is no other politician or a political family which has done so much for its core supporters. So that attracts, continues to attract the loyalty of school teachers, college teachers, irrigation department officials, clerks in social welfare ministry, in irrigation ministry, you name it, right? So I'll just give you one example, right? In when Kumaraswamy was the chief minister in 2006, 2007, 80 new first grade colleges were established all across Karnataka. 11 were sanctioned to his home district. Wow. Right? So that's the kind of infrastructure that they've been building. So hostels, hospitals, schools. So this social infrastructure is something that they've created and put resources into their and also recruited people who will be manning all this through Karnataka Public Service Commission, selections and so on. So that continues to remain their core constituency. This is something, I would submit, again, we can discuss this at some length. BJP leaders have not done this, despite building...
I was just going to say that sounds very much like the BJP, that kind of far-reaching, insertion into institutions of like-minded people. That sounds very much like a BJP strategy.
BJP, unfortunately, or whatever, they haven't done it in Karnataka for the simple reason that for the last 15 years, and this takes us back to the corruption question.
So I was going to come to the corruption question. Okay, can I just ask you the question and then we can? Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about corruption because I know that in the past, I don't know if that is a view that you still hold, but in the past you have written about how corruption is not an electoral issue in Karnataka, and your argument has been that it has become in Karnataka a sort of a victimless crime where national resources owned by the state are plundered by this new class of politician entrepreneur. And your argument is that it is such a broader social phenomenon that it has not remained electorally salient because it is there everywhere, because it is too wide and in a large sense, victimless. Now, what I want to ask you is that when I was traveling, for instance, again, and the others have also written about the fact that corruption seemed to be on the voters' mind. Now, when I, for instance, would talk to the voters, I would also always counter question, isn't it that corruption has been there and is always already there, but in all governments. And the answer that I got was that not to this level. That's broadly what their point was, that there is something that has been done in the last 5 years where this loot, or as somebody said, it's no longer corruption, it is collection, open collection. So I want to ask you, do you still think that it was not really corruption, that we are misreading it, and that there are other things that contributed to this result, not an anger against corruption? And within that, if you could also elaborate on how you have said corruption has become a constitutive of governance in Karnataka, and particularly the BJP's role in all of this. So if you could just, this is a big question, but you have written about this, and I know that you have things to say here. Please.
So I think I continue to hold on to the views that I had, because I believe there's corruption is a new phenomena, the way corruption operates. That doesn't mean bribes are not taken. Bribes are taken, but there is a way in which, two things have happened. One is there's the use of most of the public projects, for example, right? They are now not being given to someone for a share of the profit or for a bribe, but in most cases, it's the politicians themselves who will offer to become the contractors or entrepreneurs. And this is something which is fairly common across the board, because in most cases, people with such experience have actually entered politics. So there's that dimension to it. And the other is, given the significance of extractive industries like mining, and then of real estate in public life and in politics in particular, the reason why, many of the people associated with these industries are entering into politics is because they want to make sure their runs large, and they can manipulate public policy, they can get their clearances quickly, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, corruption has assumed this dual phase, right? So two phases, and that is the reason why I'm characterizing. I'm arguing that corruption has become constitutive of governance, because instead of any substantive notion of public good, some public welfare, it is actually the private profit which would accrue to some beneficiary who is in who is in political life. It is that motivation which is actually at the center, at the heart of getting projects approved or projects executed, right? And therefore, what we see is inefficient execution of projects, which has led to erosion of state capacity to function, right? So when I argue that corruption is constitutive of governance, the point I'm trying to make is the state capacity to function has eroded substantially. But Karnataka is still a pretty rich state. It has been growing, in comparison with other states, quite dramatically. There is wealth which is being generated, and that has helped governments to continue to offer welfare programs and therefore, appeal to address some of the concerns that people may have had. So I don't think, if you look at there's always some anger about wealth which politicians are making, about corruption itself, about money that one has to pay either to get a job or a posting, but that hasn't stopped people from actually paying either to get a job or postings or to get their services done. There's no popular uprising against corruption as such, right? So if you look at what might happen under a Congress government, right, whether a vice chancellor's appointment would be free of corruption, whether teachers would get selected without paying money, or a IS officer or an engineer would get their posting without paying any money, that is not going to happen. Those practices will continue because that has become a standard mode of operating. The other aspect that you need to look at, which again you can come back and discuss at some length, is the amount of money which is being spent in the elections.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we are so serious about corruption as a society, as a state, then the kinds of obscene amounts of money which we have seen spent should not have happened. The voter is also complicit in this in a big way.
Yeah, so the fact that it has become constitutive of governance, as you put it, may not preclude the fact that it could have become a big factor in this election. That does not preclude it, does it?
So what I'm saying is it adds to the to the general unpopularity, lack of popularity, right? General mood, the momentum which is towards Congress.
Yeah.
But it doesn't become the single determinant. So when the voter goes to the polling booth, right, it's not, right? I'd go to the extent of saying price rise, corruption. This is not to say people are not concerned about those, but are they the most important factors on the basis of which people are making their electoral decisions? I am somewhat skeptical of that argument.
So if you're skeptical about corruption and price rise, the issues I think that most people reported, which seemed uppermost on voters' minds, were corruption, price rise, jobs, not necessarily in that order. If you are saying that these are not necessarily the driving factors, then according to you, what explains this verdict?
So I began initially by saying the campaign was about two questions, right? Whether BJP would be able to hold on to, its Lok Sabha voter, and whether JDS was going to implode or not.
Yeah.
So when when you're looking at those questions, there's no. Congress is not an actor in this, right? And how do we then explain a stunning performance? That becomes a big question. So I've been thinking about this issue for this question for the last 3-4 days, and the way I want to frame it is by asking a question: did Congress run an inspired campaign, or did it run a competent campaign? Right? In my mind, it ran a competent, flawless campaign. There was no big grand vision that Congress leaders were presenting. If you want to see examples of the kind of campaigning that they were doing, whether at the level of manifestos, you're seeing a bunch of collection of populist promises,
guarantees, with AAP-style guarantees.
Yeah, without no sort of grand vision of the philosophical or moral argument or moral vision that informs it. I mean, in the past, whether it was Mr. Devegowda or Ramakrishna Hegde or Siddaramaiah himself have made arguments about or shared visions of a prosperous Karnataka. What does it mean to be, in a prosperous Karnataka? And how do we actually grow as a state together? We didn't hear any such argument from anyone. On the contrary, what we saw, even in Siddaramaiah's own campaign, was, the utilization of third-rung, C-lister film stars who are standing with him, trying to appeal to the electorate. And this is in one of the richest constituencies in terms of per capita income, in terms of facilities, just outside of Mysore. I know you drove through that constituency. Yeah. If you were to go there, I mean, every 3 kilometers, every 4 kilometers, you're going to stop because you come across a very scenic, field or a scene which is picture perfect, and you want to stop and take a photograph, right? And he wasn't able to talk to his constituents in an elevated tone and say, look, you guys are well off. You go to North Karnataka, there's genuine impoverishment, there's genuine poverty. You're close to Mysore, you have access to all the services. elect me so that I can go and develop the entire state. You never heard any talk about sacrifice or shared sharing of resources and some moral argument which uh, brought people together emotionally. That never happened. So it was always an appeal to some caste.
No, so if the Congress did not have this bigger, wider imagination or appeal, what is it that drove the voter away from the BJP if it was not corruption that did it?
No, I think it's a. The only way I can explain the really emphatic victory that Congress had, and the fact that it ended up getting about 43% of the votes, 43% plus votes, is by saying everything aligned, everything all the stars aligned, and this is one of those things which happens very rarely because. It was very fortuitous, as I wrote in my piece, that you had representatives of the major communities, except for Lingayats. I mean, even though you had a senior Lingayat leader in M.B. Patil, you had major representatives of every other community in the Congress leadership, whether it's Mr. Siddaramaiah or D.K. Shivakumar or Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge and so on. They all were able to bring their communities, their vote banks to Congress. The candidate selection seemed to have gone right. This is not to say they managed to find inspirational candidates. They just managed to find good winnable candidates. And the kind of candidate, I mean, in some cases, it's completely impossible to explain why some people were getting tickets, because in one case, in Madhur constituency, the Congress candidate was someone who had actively taken part in bringing down the Kumaraswamy and Congress coalition government just 3.5 years before that, or less than 4 years before now. So they managed to just find winnable candidates, and that is one thing. And in addition to that, there's the general mood, even though it was not the single most determining factor, both price rise and corruption.
So you mentioned the Lingayats and the caste coalition that the Congress had, the social coalition. So, the Lingayat factor has been talked about hugely. In the run up to the election, there was much talk about how there could be a desertion of the Lingayat vote, from the BJP because of the perceived sidelining of B.S. Yediyurappa, and also because of the exit of prominent Lingayat leaders like Jagdish Shettar in North Karnataka. So there was a lot of talk about how the Lingayats might vote, whether they would stay with the traditional, as they have traditionally done, would they still vote for the BJP or would they shift? And now that the Congress seems to have won, and the Congress has got, I think, 28 more seats in the Lingayat strongholds. Yes, 28 more seats in the Lingayat belt than it had in 2018.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, Professor Shobhi, because I know that you have done a lot of work on the social and cultural and political history of the Lingayats. Now, when we talk of the Lingayat vote, I mean, we also mistake the Lingayats for the castes that we know, a similar caste like the Jats in Haryana or the Marathas in Maharashtra or the Patels in Gujarat. But, the Lingayats are not that kind of a caste. They are an umbrella kind of an identity where actually all castes participate, and the identity has evolved. It has tried to also acquire more firm and bounded lines because of political competition for quotas and democratic representation. So at the end of it, I mean, given how closely you've studied the Lingayats, is there something called a Lingayat vote?
So Lingayats as a community exist in Bangalore, not in Dharwad, not in Bijapur, not in Belgaum, not in Gokak, not in any of the towns, Chitradurga. In those places, the dominant Lingayat subcaste is what you talk about, whether it is the Banajigas, whether it's the Sadar, Pancham Sali, So um, they all come together as Lingayats when they come to Bangalore and have to form a pressure group. And that has always been the case.
This happens, you're saying, only in Bangalore?
In Bangalore, in the sense the Lingayat identity becomes important, right? They are united against Vokaligayas or other caste groups to function as a pressure group within um, the while seeking a share of the power or access to government services and or resources and so on. If you think about how they've approached making various demands on the state in the past, whether it is while asking for the minority status or it started out as a demand to ask for a separate census entry, not even a minority status, which would then enable them to get their correct socio-economic status established, because their argument consistently has been going back in some respects going back to the 1940s, but definitely from 1960s, late 60s onwards, that there are more Lingayats than are counted, and therefore in any backward caste class commission report, they're being undercounted, and therefore their economic and social data has not been captured properly, which leads to them being seen as a forward caste as opposed to a backward caste. So if you only count them properly, their backwardness would get established. This has been a consistent argument for the last 55 years. So when they put in an argument or put in such an argument in front of the state government or central government, that's when they produce a Lingayats identity, a discourse about Lingayats. Yeah. But elsewhere, right, if you look at practices, marriage practices or other cultural practices, they all happen within subcastes. There are some broad, indicators like the practice of wearing personal linga on one's body or initiation ceremony. There are some common practice, life cycle rituals, they're commonly shared. But politically, there's always been intense competition among subcastes. So Lingayats and other castes too have, especially in recent times, in the last 2 decades, the 3 decades, have voted tactically. It's always been to find a candidate who could do more for the community. Right? The party affiliation has not been so important. So the point I'd like to make is they don't vote as a community across Karnataka, but even though a large chunk of the vote might go, it depends on whether the party that they want to support has chosen the right subcaste candidate and has made the right arguments to the subcaste, or has provided, the largest, which the matha of that caste or subcaste or some other institution of that subcaste has demanded. So when those things are done properly, then the votes will flow in that direction, but not otherwise.
Yeah, so the matha, that is what I wanted to ask you next. I mean, it is a very, very powerful civil society institution. Could you just tell us how the power of the matha, and also is there a political power of the matha?
So mathas have been since at least 17th century, 16th, 17th century. Mathas and ascetic orders associated with Lingayats have been negotiating.
Let me just interrupt you for a minute. So sure. I come from Punjab, and there is the Dera there, the Sikh. Yeah. So if you could just give a comparison of, is the Dera the same as the Matha? The Deras, I think, are a much more recent phenomenon. The Matha goes back to what, 12th, 13th century?
So most of the orders that we know today, most of the mathas that we know today, one or two claim their origins from 11th, 12th century, but most of the mathas are from 16th, 17th century. Okay. And ascetic orders too are from 16th, 17th century. So these were they were negotiating on behalf of the community with the local political power, whether it's the kings or local potentates or feudatories and so on. And therefore, they always had this political dimension without actually being involved in politics. Right? They were representing the community, and they were organizing the community. They were never a political force as such, but in the 20th century, they played an active role by mobilizing the community, by creating educational infrastructure, and especially in the second half of the 20th century, by becoming social entrepreneurs, basically, with substantial capacity to offer employment to the community. Right? It's not just the ability to offer education, facilitate education by setting up hostels, and so on, but actually establish so many institutions, education institutions, or healthcare, or other services, which enables them to actually become employment generators, employment providers. So in several districts, the Matas will be the second largest employment provider after the government. Right? So that's the source of their influence.
So in the run-up to every election in Punjab, you see a beeline that politicians make for these deras, and they will genuflect, they will touch the feet of the dera chief, and the dera chief will, be photographed giving blessings. The deras usually do not send out an explicit political signal or directive, but there are implicit ways in which dera chiefs will let their followers know which side they are tilting towards. So does the same kind of thing happen in the case of the Matas in Karnataka?
I believe so. Most of the the pontiffs, the Swamijis, do not come out openly and support a candidate, but sometimes they've taken public stances. For example, in the 1960s, once Nijlingappa was defeated because of subcaste politics. So occasionally things like that happen, but it is very rare that a Matha would come out and openly support, or even send out an explicit message, even if it doesn't come out in a public meeting, in support of a candidate or in support of a party. Partly because they also maintain support with good relationships with every leader. Just to give you one example, right? Sutturu Matha, which is the most powerful and the most resource-rich Matha in Karnataka. Sutturu is actually in Varuna constituency, which is Siddaramaya's constituency, very close to his village. And I've never heard of Matha opposing his candidacy, even though he belongs to a different community, right? And he has always had a Lingayat opponent. So there's been some distance maintained. Although the Matha employees of the Matha might be working for a candidate or might vote for a candidate of their own caste.
So this demand of the Lingayats for minority status to be accepted as a separate religion, this was also, in a sense, I think Siddaramaiah acknowledged the demand and sort of was seen to support it publicly. Do you think this is going to be a challenge going ahead for the Congress government in the state?
It should not, because for the state government, it's simply sending a report. The role of the state government in this process is that of a postman, right? Send the recommendation to the Ministry of Minority Affairs and let the Ministry of Minority Affairs deal with it, and send appropriate signals or instructions to census. Not instructions would. It's not that instructions would go out, but whatever they have to do in coordination with each other in order to offer a separate entry to Lingayats. But the arguments themselves, right? There is enough in the historical sources to make both claims that Lingayats are Hindus and they're not Hindus. So it's like being a lawyer. Which case you want to make, you can make that case, and you can find enough evidence in the historical record. What's interesting here is quite often, for a religious community, if it is a question of asserting one's identity or offering a narrative about one's identity, it's simply something which they can do without having to get the recognition of the government for that. So if Lingayats want to come out and say that they're not Hindus, nobody can stop them from doing it. The problem for the governments and even for the Lingayats arises when they have to get the government to approve that within a narrow legal framework. on the basis of a set of criteria which is used to recognize Jains or Christians or Buddhists as minorities. So the problem here is not whether it is for the Siddaramaiah government or for Lingayats or for the central government that Lingayats wish to be a separate religion. It is that that case has to be adjudicated within certain narrow governance frameworks, and that is not easy.
So, Professor Shobhi, the BJP, now the BJP has it has held on to its vote share, 36%. I think it's just come down by 0.2% or something. So, it has held on to its vote share. Now, what does that mean? Do we see this verdict as some kind of a rejection of Hindutva, or as Professor Suhas Palshikar wrote on our pages just recently, his argument was that there's a question mark to that thesis, that rejection of Hindutva. He says that this could be the defeat of the BJP may not necessarily mean the rejection of majoritarianism or the spread of Hindutva in the state. What would you say on this?
I think I largely agree with that. Because if the Lok Sabha elections are held today, I wouldn't be surprised if if BJP manages to win 20 plus seats. Mm-hmm. And if it gets, let's say, about 43, 44, even 45%, or perhaps go beyond that, because
But then what does that mean? What are we to make of it in the context of Hindutva? For a minute, if we keep Modi aside, does it mean that at the state level there is Hindutva hits a wall, but it does not hit that wall at the central level? Is that what we are saying? And why?
I believe at the central level, even the one, even somebody who might be voting on the basis of a caste for a Vidhan Sabha candidate will look at different, will have different motivations while voting for a Lok Sabha candidate. And the dynamics is also very different. The number of, you have 18, 20 lakh voters, and for majority of whom the caste of the candidate is not a singular determinant of their vote, as it would be in the case of Vidhan Sabha or Jila Panchayat or Taluk Panchayat elections. So here, national issues become more important, and Hindutva, to a certain extent, has an appeal because you do see a resentment towards minorities, especially a resentment towards aggressive neighbors, whether it's Bangladesh or Pakistan, quite obscenely articulated sometimes, with violent imagery, with great aggression, and so there's that, and also when it comes to a national discussion, there seems to be a tendency to fall back on one's Hindu identity and see that as more important than caste identity, in a way that doesn't become quite relevant in the context of local elections, and that is, I think, borne out by not just by anecdotal evidence, but if you were to do a survey, you will find that this is a far more conservative society than we had sort of earlier, despite the progressive legacy and tradition that Karnataka has had. Still is a fairly conservative society when it comes to these kinds of issues, and that has gotten consolidated in recent times.
I was also asking you about Hindutva in Karnataka because in the run-up to the election, it was also common to hear arguments that to the tune that the BJP may have overplayed its Hindutva, that there is a saturation point that it may have reached. Where does that come from? I mean, why is Hindutva not only seen as a growth area as it is in other states? It's a political project that is seen as a growth project. Why did Karnataka constantly talk of the limits of Hindutva?
I don't know whether I have a very good answer to this question, but it's an important question. Um, I think it may have something to do with the kind of examples which one picks. Tipu um, is
Yeah.
an often used case. There were other religious sites in one in Chikmagalur in particular, which was often um, raised as an example of Islamic aggression. But by and large, Karnataka has also had this legacy of harmony. Even in the case of Tipu, um, he was quite aggressive. He was quite violent. He was quite cruel towards um, various communities of people who were either outside his empire or outside the core region of his state, of his polity. So was his approach one of a religious zealot? When you have these nuanced discussions, even in a different kind of understanding of Tipu, a more complex understanding of Tipu comes out. The reason why I'm coming to this is because when you try to brandish him, when you try to brand him as an evil zealot, um, that branding also hits a wall at some point because it runs counter to the memories of people. It runs counter to the historical record, and that is something of an issue that BJP has had to deal with. Similarly, the memory of partition or the memory of Islamic aggression has not been as fresh, and strong in Karnataka, even in North Karnataka, where in regions like Hyderabad, Karnataka, with the exception of let's say the rule of Hyderabad, Nizams, the earlier the Bahmani Sultanate or other sort of political presence of Islamic political presence in North Karnataka has been fairly benign, and therefore um, there is a shared culture of religious spaces being used together, Islamic scholars commenting on vachanas, other scholars, Hindu scholars learning Islamic texts, and Sufism has been a major influence, and because of that, there's more um, memories or legacies of harmony than of disunion or of aggression. And so you cannot wish these things away, right? They're there as memories, even though there is an effort to actively uh, rewrite historical imagination, rework textbooks, and so on. So it's a battle which will continue.
In the aftermath, there one kind of argument is also going to gain force, which is that Congress ran a hyper local campaign in Karnataka, and that shows the way ahead for it to challenge Hindutva, which basically means that instead of taking on Hindutva frontally with another vision or imagination or argument, you sort of simply skirt around it and fixate on local issues. That would be the template that would be the most attractive going ahead for the Congress, given its success in Karnataka. Do you think that is the wisest strategy now for the Congress going ahead?
Depends on what is the objective. If it is um, to build a local campaign, to build a state campaign to the state assembly, that might be one way to go, and that would also help Congress to rebuild its base. Right, one of the positive benefits that Congress had in Karnataka of the Bharat Jodo Yatra was that it energized the Congress activities. It was something new, and there were images of even Siddaramaiah and Rahul Gandhi um, running. Right, that image itself it exudes youthful energy as opposed to staleness. Right, so this is the kind of ground level work that Congress needs to do. one of the issues that we have often talked about in local context is that we don't know what a Congress activist stands for. We don't know what constituent service that a Congress activist, a party worker in a district, in a taluka, in a Hubli headquarters, in a village will do. Whether it is to take somebody to the hospital, get school admission, fill a form, help someone to get BPL card. So whether Congress has a cadre of people who are actually willing to do selflessly, these kinds of things on the ground. If Congress doesn't address this, it has no future. And this is something which it has to do, in places where it has a base and, in places where it does not have a base. Without that, having a national presence becomes, a problem. When it comes to the national messaging, I mean, it's been, quite clear that, that space has been captured by BJP's vision of nationalism for quite some time. So it's a battle that Congress has to take on, whether it is to reimagine its, entitlement-based populist agenda or governance model, or to rethink of its own nationalism. How does it reimagine the Nehruvian nationalism? What is its new vision of India? Wherein there is an aspirational dimension, wherein there is a welfare dimension, where there is a governance model, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where even the state governments can actually do some good for Congress. And here is where I think the Siddaramaiah government also didn't do as well as it could have in the 2013 to 18 period. And some of us wrote about it quite extensively, both in the local media and in the national media. The biggest failure, it was a very competent government, and Siddaramaiah is a very seasoned administrator who controlled his party and governed the state quite well. But where he failed was in projecting a Karnataka model of governance, a Karnataka model of development, right? I mean, it's at one level, it's a substance issue. At another level, it's also a perception, a branding, challenge, something which Modi does extraordinarily. So unless Congress chief ministers are doing it, whether it is with the help of the central leadership or otherwise, here is one area where the central leadership cannot be afraid of someone like a Siddaramaiah or Ashok Gehlot actually experimenting innovatively with governance and coming up with a new model which will build their profile also. But if the central Congress leaders are secure in their skin and allow their chief ministers to do something, which combines all of this, right? There has to be, as I said, something which addresses the aspirational dimensions of young India, but at the same time shows how infrastructure projects could be developed efficiently, how the state functions with minimal corruption, where projects are approved quickly, and at the same time also have a broad enough appeal by remaining current, contemporary. And just one last point. One of the reasons why I characterize this as a competent, flawless, efficient campaign and not an inspiring campaign was because you never heard about what's happening in the world in 2023 from any of these leaders. Do they realize that we are in an age of Anthropocene? Do they realize that we are in an age of artificial intelligence, which might actually impact our economy in radical ways? Do they realize that we are at a moment when the future is completely unpredictable, and perhaps this is the first time in human history that we have had to actually think about all of this? None of the political parties or none of the leaders seem to be aware of this. And they also don't talk to people who might actually brief them on what is the moment in which we are living and what is it that we need to do. So it's not simply about building a highway, but what is the environmental cost of building a highway or building a power plant or building an industrial park. So what kind of a future are we going to imagine where we are going to we're going to have to face up to some of these issues. And so whether it's in the media or in the campaign, some of these issues don't come up at all, despite some small efforts that small media is, some magazines and newspapers are trying to do in Karnataka.
Professor Shobhi, even as we are talking, I think the Congress meetings are continuing to find their chief minister. So, who would be your choice? Who would you pick from Siddaramaiah and DK Shivkumar, and why?
I think it's a political problem for them that they have to. This is not. So this is a political problem and an administrative problem, right? I think a political problem in the sense of keeping hold of both the Kuruba and Vokaliga vote. So they have to come up with a system wherein, some scheme whereby both Siddaramaiah and DK Shivkumar are accommodated, because this social coalition that they've built is too important for them to lose out on. And therefore, if it just goes one way, if there is no effective power sharing arrangement, and a promise of a confirmed scheme wherein transition is promised, it becomes very difficult for them to ensure that these community votes are transferred. So there's that. And they both possess complementary skills. Siddaramaiah is actually very good with bureaucrats. His understanding of governance practices is very strong. And therefore, he can bring a certain discipline to the administration. And he has never been accused of the kind of corruption, whether it's for transfers or for delimitation of land, or, he himself has not been, an entrepreneur. He has never himself been interested in making huge sums of money, whether it is for political purposes or otherwise. And therefore, there's a certain discipline that he brings, which might be necessary in the beginning, whereas DK Shivkumar is more of a manager of political crises. And in some ways, this election might also be a moment of coming of age, in a sense, because now I think he has gotten established as a Vokaliga leader. A month ago, if you had asked me, I would have said he's not a Vokaliga leader. Today, he is sharing that stage with perhaps both Kumaraswamy and Mr. Devegowda. So there has to be a balance both for political management and for ensuring that the governance is governance efficiency is achieved. But they also need to find some way of getting some input on the kinds of important issues that I was just talking about, whether it's what kind of growth we want, what kind of development we want, what kind of whether it might mean saying no to a Foxconn, but just being very clear about what kind of investment is being brought and what kind of right now Bangalore is basically driving Karnataka's economy. Therefore, so some clarity on all of that, some expert advice that they can get. All of that actually would make a huge difference to Congress's governance. It's not just about who becomes the chief minister.
Sure, but you still haven't answered the question.
I think it would be good to start with Siddaramaiah and to transition at some point to. That's what I also expect with. We are in this age of dynastic transitions, and Siddaramaiah's son assuming an important position, partly because for Congress, he then becomes the conduit to secure Kuruba vote in the decades to come. So I think it's going to be first 2 years or 2.5 years of Siddaramaiah government, and then 2.5 years of DK Shivkumar chief ministership.
So I'll just ask one more question, and then we'll shift to audience questions.
Sure.
You are part of civil society initiatives as well, and some of them to preserve and protect Kannada literature, resources, literary and historical resources. What is the role, if any, of Kannada subnationalism in all of this, in the election, in the outcome? Do you see any role there?
I wish I could say, Kannada writers and Kannada thinkers played a a critical role in ensuring, the outcome of the elections, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, in this election, it wasn't the, I know that there are colleagues of mine, friends of mine who have written about how this vote is a rejection of not just a majoritarian politics, but actually, a homogenization of all states and so on and so forth. And they've also talked about the efforts of civil society institutions in fighting against such efforts. On the ground, it hasn't been necessarily as effective as they'd like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I believe there is both, this is a huge challenge because this ties back with the question that you asked about, whether there is a model for Congress to take to other states. I think it's not just a model for Congress, but also for BJP to think about, right? What kind? In its own nationalism, what is the place of the local culture? What is the place of regional cultures? Because there are voters in Karnataka who have talked about BJP being a party of Rama, and as a Shaiva follower or a devotee of Shiva, not having any affinity with BJP. Such voters are far and few, but there are challenges such voters propose to any party which wants to have a large social base, a large political base. And I think both at a religious level, at a ethnic, linguistic, cultural level, how do all these parties deal with diversity is something which is an interesting challenge. And in that regard, I do think, whether it's writers or thinkers, historians, artists have a huge responsibility in fashioning new imaginations.
So I promise to go to audience questions with one more question. Bangalore. Now, Bangalore is, of course, the economic engine, and so in that sense, it is for the good of the state. But do you think it also hangs heavy on the political imagination, or that it shapes the political imagination in ways that are problematic in Karnataka?
Not necessarily. See, the thing, we should have talked about this at some. Karnataka is many states. So the old Mysore, the princely kingdom, is the most advanced, is the most industrially developed. It has a 150-year history of, modern education, modern governance, of industrialization, of modern economy, and all of which has led to huge civic society expectations from governments, from institutions, and so on. So, and Bangalore is the heart of this, right? And Bangalore is also, because of some of the initiatives that the princely state undertook and civic society initiatives, Bangalore had, from the 1910s, a number of institutions which propelled its growth and its current status in the global economy, in the global knowledge industry since the 1970s and 1980s. Right, that growth continues unimpeded, and it has also led to a transformation of the state in ways that we cannot even imagine. Right, Bangalore becomes the driver of Karnataka's economy, but more importantly, it has also changed so much demographically, culturally, because of the people who are coming in. And migrants. And that actually opens up all kinds of other political opportunities. One of the disappointments of the last 15 years is that a party like AAP couldn't do what it did in Delhi, in Bangalore. If there is one city in all of India where a middle class party, aspirational, and not necessarily tied to caste politics, if the groundwork is done, if the organizing is done on the ground effectively and efficiently, a new politics can be imagined around accountability, around transparency, around services, around absence of corruption, and so on and so forth. And Bangalore has the ground ready because it is the city with the largest number of civic society organizations which are working on civic issues. So both on a demographic front and sort of in terms of political preparation, Bangalore offers that potential. But none of these have been realized. None of these possibilities have been realized. So in that sense, Bangalore remains this unrealized promise, and it hasn't realized its potential. But for Karnataka, it still remains the same promise, which it is to both an educated upper class or potentially upper class potential employee in the new economy industry, or a migrant worker who might be coming into work in in the construction sector or in some other sector. So people from across Karnataka, right? I mean, there are parts of Karnataka which are comparable in their socio-economic profile to many of the North Indian states, to the Jharkhands and to the Bihars. So that is the paradox of Karnataka in a sense, right? It has this southern, prosperous, educated, with good human development index indices in the southern part, and in the north there's underdevelopment. So for those people, Bangalore continues to remain the same, place of promise where they can come and make a living for themselves. So it's not a problem. It's not a challenge. It's in some ways, at least in my reading, an unrealized promise, which continues to be there, and hopefully over the next 10 years, that will become the vanguard for a new kind of political imagination.
Yeah, what I was talking more in terms of, does it skew the political imagination in a way that is a problem for the state?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, there is nothing Bangalore specific which sort of upsets other parts of the state. In some ways, it's actually Bangaloreans who are feeling let down because they believe their resources are being used to either run a welfare state or develop other parts of the state, and it's not the other way around.
So we'll go to audience questions now. Brajesh Verma, who's Director IPB Consulting, please ask your question.
Yeah. Hello, Vandita ji, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. First of all, good evening to Dr. Shobhi also. It's a very interesting discussion. And so I wanted to ask a question which is a little bit pan-India centric, not necessarily, but Karnataka may be the cause for that. Now, it's normally said that to win an Lok Sabha election, the route goes through Uttar Pradesh, UP. So do you think there are any means, because as they say, exception proves the rule. So do you think, is there any other way that, in spite of UP going towards one party, there could be a rule of, another coalition or maybe opposition at Delhi?
It depends on whether all these regional groups can come together and find a common purpose. So that's a difficult prospect to realize. I mean, in effect, even though Congress has its base in a few states, we effectively have regional political forces in all of East India, on the eastern coast, from Tamil Nadu to Bengal. You have opposition party governments, each of them with its own aspirations, political interests, and so on. How a plurality of them will come together, what kind of an agenda they will have, what kind of political imagination they'll exercise. Very difficult to predict, and it's also not easy to figure out how it might work, because the case is, as I was saying in the context of Karnataka itself, the case is a case that needs to be made locally for a national on a bunch of national issues, and all these regional leaders, whether it's KCR or Stalin, they'll have to show how they have a shared vision of a nation, which also aligns with their regional ambitions or regional political goals.
Amarjeet Singh, who's former director at Motherson Sumi Limited, please ask your question. Is Amarjeet Singh there? We can move to the next question then. Priyadarshini Karan from Plutus IAS.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Hi, this is Priyadarshini Karan from Plutus IS. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And my question is that, does Karnataka elections change the future dynamics of political parties for other states, paving their way towards 2024 general elections?
I mean, there are lessons to be learned, and we have talked about some of those. Right? What are the benefits of empowering local leaders who will build the party, who will understand what is needed in their states, and therefore who will be able to speak to the aspirations of a state. And if there is a system whereby in a national political party there can be a conversation between central leadership and state leadership, sharing of ideas, and fashioning of a new political imagination, which allows for addressing state concerns, state development needs, state cultural or other aspirations that people in a state may have, and align those with the national goals of a party. So there are certain achievements that Karnataka you could clearly see in the case of Karnataka Congress, and whether it's in thinking about welfare measures which actually will work quite well in Karnataka, as opposed to, I mean, you may have to come up with a new and a different set of populist measures in other states, but the way messaging was done, the way organization was revitalized, the way different leaders of the party worked in a complementary manner. I mean, these are things which seem obvious, but they're actually difficult to practice because we all have different interests, different goals, which might come in the way of working as a collective. So if Congress is able to sort of take some of these lessons, or other parties are able to take these lessons, that might be something which will work.
Premanand Shivagunde, who's with PGS and Associates. Please ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, I'm a Lingayat by birth, so I relate much to the discussion, whatever happened today. So my question to the speaker is, the BJP managed to retain its vote share. The 5% shift away from JDS went to Congress. So what was the contribution of the Bharat Jodo Yatra and the fact of Mallikarjun Kharge becoming president of Congress to this shift?
So the Bharat Jodo Yatra, I think in my mind, set the mood, right? It also energized the party. I mean, in Congress has not seen. There are yatras which are done. I mean, even the Prajadwani Yatra, which was done, the Citizen Voice Yatra, which was done a couple of months before the elections. These are affairs where people are brought in large numbers by paying them, by providing accommodations to them, and by providing transport to them, and so on. But on the other hand, Bharat Jodo Yatra was somewhat different. It was, I mean, you're walking. You're not bringing people to have an audience of a meeting of 100,000 people. So this provides a different kind of dynamic to interact with people, to create those very human moments, humane, sort of interactions where you are in touch with the local culture. You are meeting with ordinary people in a way that becomes impossible in big rallies, in big yatras, or even in election campaigns. And so, to that extent, Bharat Jodo Yatra was an important contribution to, revitalize the spirits of the Congress worker, and to also present the Congress leaders, both the state level leaders and the national leaders, to people across the country. Whether that can be sustained or whether that can be institutionalized will depend on what Congress does next. But so in Karnataka, it did set the mood because it came at the right time, right, 6 months before the election. So there was enough time for the activists, party workers, to do something with this reinvigorated spirit. And Mallikarjun Kharge's elevation is an important signal, both to the Dalit groups and particularly in Karnataka. It's an important position of national importance, which Congress, Kannadiga leader had gotten after about 50 years. Kharge is the first sort of national figure to have gotten that importance after Nijalingappa in the 1960s. And therefore, it made a huge difference. And ironically, it also removed him from chief minister's race. Had it not been the Congress president, he would have been a strong contender, adding to the gadbud that we already have. And therefore, he is in this, elevated position now. And that is something to keep in mind in this context.
So Amarjeet Singh is back. Could you please ask your question? Mr. Amarjeet Singh? Okay, there is a question in the question box here by H.N. Bhagwat. Mr. Bhagwat, if you're there, please ask your question. So I can ask you his question, Professor Shobhi. He says a prominent Muslim leader has demanded deputy chief ministership for their community as a reward for their role in defeating the BJP. How influential was tactical voting by Muslims in the defeat of the BJP?
I think in this election, there was no tactical voting. In earlier elections, there was tactical voting. If there was a credible JDS candidate, they would have voted for that candidate. In this election, it was complete support to Congress. It looks like from the numbers. So would that result in a Muslim getting deputy chief ministership? I think the problem there is there are one or two senior Muslim leaders, but there's no one of stature who might actually be a national contender for a deputy chief ministership, or who could be potentially seen as a chief ministerial candidate. That's one of the challenges for Congress itself to develop such leaders, to train them, give them opportunities so that they become good administrators. And Congress has not done that well, even though there are a couple of young promising leaders in Karnataka Congress. Whether they'll get opportunities, whether they themselves will be disciplined enough to take advantage of those opportunities, we don't know. Only time can tell. But at the moment, it's all that talk is premature and it's not going to happen.
So I think we'll end it here, except my last question is, what is your wish list from this new government that comes? If you can give us the 3 big things or the 5 big things that you are looking for from the new government.
I think, corruption is something which is corruption in all its forms. I know that it's very difficult to address this issue because it is this corruption which feeds political financing and so on. So it's this tetrahedral hydra which cannot be cut off so easily. So that is something which obviously anyone will talk about. But I think I'll, 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 I'll say a recognition of some of the um, key problems. For example, a sector that I am familiar with, education, higher education specifically. Um, there's a complete mismatch between an understanding of the institutional reality and the kind of solutions which are offered. Universities don't get faculty recruitment doesn't happen for 15 years, 20 years in a university. Resources are lacking, and so even in a progressive state like Karnataka, um, then even though you have the infrastructure, you have the institutions, they don't function well. There is a sickness in our institutions which we need to address, and that requires a very different kind of orientation and mindset. The second is, this is again in the context of this campaign I've been thinking about. I think there is a poverty in our political thinking. It's completely taken over our ability to reform institutions. Preventing us from or sort of stopping us from reforming our institutions, facing the challenges that we need to address, and so on and so forth. And therefore, a slightly more imaginative approach. And finally, some of the core issues that, perhaps one actually starts with Bangalore. Bangalore's infrastructure. I think if it gets addressed, some of the problems that Bangalore is facing, if those get addressed, that might actually revitalize other parts of the state. And those are the three things which come to mind immediately.
Thank you so much, Professor Shobhi. It was wonderful to listen to you. And I'll give it over to Monojit now.
Dr. Shobhi, thank you so much. I'm afraid I couldn't be here for much of it. There's an edition tonight, but I am going to listen to the whole thing on YouTube, absolutely. And for all of you who want to listen, pass this on, or maybe go back to it and listen, because I'm sure there must be a lot of stuff that you'd like to refer back to. The link will be up on YouTube, on the Indian Express's YouTube channel shortly. And please go back to it and please listen. Dr. Shobhi, thank you so much again. And Vandita, thank you. My thanks also to our partner once again, Plutus IAS, and this wonderful audience that we have had here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Plutus IAS. Our features are live interactive classes, limited batch size, well qualified and experienced faculties, doubt removal sessions, current affair classes, study material and test series, mentorship program, mock interviews. To know more, contact us at 844-844-0231 or visit our website www.plutusis.com. Plutus IAS. Our features are live interactive classes, limited batch size, well qualified and experienced faculties, doubt removal sessions, current affair classes, study material and test series, mentorship program, mock interviews.